Let us turn this HDR panorama into this final image using Photoshop. So what I have in mind for this tutorial is I want to concentrate a little bit on color grading, giving the image a much stronger sunset look while also restoring details from the darkest parts. As always, you can follow along by downloading the raw file from the link in the description of this video, and now let's go. So this is the freshly merged panoramic image which we need to crop now. I want to take away quite a huge chunk from the right side since this is really not that interesting for us. Also, I want to take away a part from the left where all the people are standing on the bridge just to nicely frame the scene. I'm also going to take away a part from the bottom and from the top. So we end up with something that looks kind of like this. And what you can see here is the buildings on each side are kind of leaning towards the outside of the image. This looks very, very strange and we want to fix that. And the first step of doing this is to just head into the geometry tab down here. And we can make use of the vertical slider, just trying to fix those skewed vertical lines this way. I don't want to overdo it since I do think I need to fix most of that later in Photoshop, but that's a pretty good start so far. I do want to focus on the color grading aspect, so let's start with this. I do want to change the profile to Adobe Landscape just to bring up the saturation a bit and also restore some details from the darkest parts. And now let's go quickly through the lights panel, adjusting the exposure. At the moment, looking at the histogram, you can see it's quite dark, but that's not a big deal. I want to keep it dark, but I still want to raise the exposure to bring out even more details. I also want to raise the shadows very slightly. And let's raise the blacks. Okay. This is looking really, really good for the foreground, but the sky is completely blown out. We don't have any details in here, so let's fix that. Since this is an HDR shot, we can safely pull down the highlights to restore all the details we need from the sky. And by pulling down the highlights, you can see we now have some nicely visible clouds up there on the horizon. Perfect. The histogram is looking much better. At some point we did lose a little bit of contrast. I want to change that by slightly raising the whites and just pushing the histogram a little further to the right side. Wonderful. So that's it for the light adjustments. Let's take a look at the color tab right here to adjust the white balance and saturation. For this scene, let me bring up the temperature very, very slightly just to make this shot look a little warmer like this. I'm not going to touch the tint. I do think I want to bring up the vibrance to push the saturation a notch and get this real intense sunset look. That looks great. Then we can also go through the effects step real quick. I want to bring up the texture, adding some more sharpness to the smaller details. I also want to bring up the dehaze for a little more contrast. And I do want to bring down the clarity just to add some kind of glowing look overall. So that looks pretty nice. And we are done with the basic adjustments. You can see compared to before, we did change the image quite a bit already, but we can do so much more. Let's go on with a bit of masking. As always, the masking has a huge impact on images I added. So what I want to do first is to work on the sky. Let's create a simple sky mask. What I want to do with the sky is to make it darker at the top, and thus just create some nice vignetting effect. Of course, for that I don't want to select all the sky. I want to use the subtract button, choose a radial gradient, and just subtract the brightest areas of the sky. For this purpose, I'm going to bring down the feather of this radial gradient just to get a harder edge. And I think this is looking pretty good. So what I want to do here is to bring down the exposure, making the top part a lot darker. Alright, that looks great. What we can do as well is to add some more blue tint to this space up there. So I'm just going to bring down the temperature a notch, introducing more blue color tones. Another thing I want to do with the sky, I want to create a radial gradient right about here. let's not forget to bring up the feather. And again, I only want to target the sky. Right now, we are also targeting the buildings in the foreground. So we want to go click on those 3 dots, choose intersect mask with, and choose select sky. This will give us a perfect selection only targeting the sky. And what I want to do here is to add some more light coming in from behind the buildings. So let's bring up the exposure, making this spot a little brighter. And I also want to bring up the temperature, introducing some warmer color tones in here. Perfect. We could adjust the size of this radial gradient a bit, but this is looking good. I want to use another radial gradient over the same spot, maybe a little bit smaller, but what I want to do with this is to introduce some light bloom effect, or in other terms, just a little bit of glow. And I'm doing this by increasing the blacks, and I'm going to drop the dehaze. This works really, really good. Next up, let's work on the foreground. Again, I'm just using a radial gradient with which I want to target pretty much all of that reflection in the water like this. And I just want to push the clarity, making this reflection a little more visible. And one more radial gradient for the center part, just right about here. I want to make this part a little brighter by bringing up the whites and maybe even add a little bit of clarity. Wonderful. So I'm still not quite happy with the sky. I think I want to use another radial gradient targeting a bigger portion of the sky like this. Again, we don't want to affect the buildings in the foreground, so click on the 3 dots, go to intersect mask with and choose sky. So let me see, I want to further bring up the exposure. And I want to further raise the temperature. I want to give this part a very intense warm look like this. Wonderful. Let's see, I want to adjust this radial gradient a little bit, but this is looking fine. Of course, since we have adjusted the upper part, we also need to work on the reflection. So I'm going to create a color range mask, click right in here, which should give us a proper selection like this. And again, I'm making use of the intersect tool with the radial gradient this time. Just covering this part, which should be another color. And I'm doing this by simply raising the temperature. And that's it. Perfect. Let me show you the image before the masking. We went from this to this. Looks so much better, but of course now comes the most interesting part, the color grading. And we can start this as always in the color mixer. There are a few things I want to change in the hue. Mainly the yellow and green hue because of that street light, which is really annoying. So I want to bring down the yellow hue. I'm going to drop it quite a bit. And I'm also bringing down the green hue. This also just brings all the colors here more in line with each other. So we have a nice warm and cold color palette going on, which looks great. So then let's head over into the saturation tab. I want to bring up the orange tones just a bit. I want to bring down the yellow tones. And I think I'm going to raise the blue saturation to make the sky a little more interesting. Wonderful. This already looks good, but we can enhance it some more using split toning in the color grading tab. Here, let's work on the highlights first. The base image already has some quite warm highlights and we want to further improve that. So we want to choose a warm hue first. And then depending on what you like, you can push the saturation quite heavily. I'm going to bring it up quite a bit like this. All right, that looks awesome. Now let's head into the midtones. Here I want to kind of counterbalance all the warm tones by applying a cold color tone to the midtones. So set up the hue to something cold and bring up the saturation. This is looking awesome. And that's it for the color grading. Now we can also sharpen this image in the details tab. So let's do that real quick. Bring down the radius, increase the details, introduce a bit of masking and introduce more sharpening. Done. So that is the image after the raw adjustments, and you can see it looks quite a bit different, looks much better in my opinion. So let's work on the distortion. Let's open up this object. So fixing distortion like this is something I really hate doing, but we need to do it. So I want to duplicate that layer by hitting Ctrl J just to have a backup. And my plan to fix this distortion is to use the perspective warp tool. So let's go to Edit and choose Perspective Warp. Using this tool, you can create a grid by just dragging one up like this. I'm going to target the skewed building on the left, just like this. Then I'm also going to target the building on the right. And I'm going to create a third grid right here in the center. Make sure those points are snapping together. Otherwise, you might get some weird looking spaces later on in your image. So once you have done this, we need to click on Warp. Now what I want to do is to drag around certain points in here to try and manually unskew these buildings. This means I'm going to take the upper point and just drag it to the right and try to get a straight vertical line going up this building, just like this. And we can do the same on the right side. Just going to push this point further to the left. So I think this is looking pretty good so far. Let's hit the check icon to confirm this transformation. At this point, we want to crop the image a little more. So let's hit C to bring up the crop tool. I'm going to take away parts from each side, just like that. And maybe from the bottom as well and the top. Okay. At this point, I'm not happy with this door frame. I want to duplicate that layer once more, hitting Ctrl J, and let me try the perspective warp once more. So I want to try selecting only this spot right here. And let's hit warp. And let's see if we can fix that. Of course, this will distort the whole image, but let's confirm this anyway. I'm going to create a layer mask and I'm going to mask out the door frame using a black brush. And then I'm going to invert that layer mask by hitting Ctrl I. This way, kind of nicely fix that door frame and it doesn't look as distorted as before. At this point, what's really bothering me is this light up here. I'm not sure how to get rid of it, but I want to try using the generative fill. So I'm using the lasso tool, make a really rough selection around those lens flares, hit generative fill and hit generate. That's not looking too bad. I think this will work. So let's go with this. At this point I want to merge everything, so let's hit Ctrl Shift Alt E, which puts everything in the new layer. And then we can do some final adjustments. First off, I want to add some more glow, create a new layer for that. I'm changing the blending mode to hard light. Again, grab the brush by pressing B, set the brush opacity to 10% to not overdo this effect. And I want to pick a warm color tone from the sky right here. So I'm holding down the Alt key and click in this spot to pick up this color. I want to make this color brighter by shifting this point to the left. Okay. And then with the brush tool, I'm going to paint in a few times right in this bright spot of the sky. I'm going to change the brush size up a little bit. This is looking great. We can further brighten up this foreground color and work our way towards the horizon level, making this part especially bright. Wonderful. Probably also need to do that in the reflection. Just a bit. Okay, and I want to create a new layer. Again, this time switch the blending mode to soft light. And I want to pick a color from the lights right here. And I just want to go over all the lights, introducing some glow around them. Okay, and that is the finished image. So I hope this Photoshop tutorial was helpful and interesting. If you have any questions left, as always, feel free to ask in the comments, and thank you so much for watching this video.